This is our voice-narrated presentation on the 7 general structures of best practice teaching. These are not necessarily literacy-focused. However, with the introduction of each, I provide some examples of how I have utilized the structure within my reading or English classes. As you listen and watch, note which structures lend themselves to assisting learners in that transition from learning to read to reading to learn as they continue throughout their academic careers. Also, hone in on what are some of the similarities between what we're reading about in our text when it comes to best literacy instruction and these 7 structures that are presented here. Chapter 2 of the Best Practice Bringing Standards to Life in America's Classroom by Stephen Zemelman, Harvey Smokey Daniels, and Arthur Hyde provides ideas on what they consider to be the 7 structures of best practice teaching. As mentioned, these structures are not limited to the teaching of literacy. They can be applied to all content areas. What we find explained in this text are things we can infuse in our teaching and tweak to our style. These are ideas you can support as a literacy leader at any point in time, and this week's task is to connect these general ideas to what our text provides us as best practice literacy instruction in this week as well as the upcoming ones. Over the next several slides, I will provide ideas and share some of my personal experiences utilizing and implementing those structures. Think about how you can promote and support the use of these structures in the classrooms you teach in, as well as throughout your district as a literacy leader. I also have used this particular text in our Professional Development Academy in our district, where I invited teachers at all levels and of all content areas to participate in a book study and apply these ideas to their teaching and classroom lives. This is something that all teachers can find useful, no matter what it is that they teach. The gradual release of responsibility is the basis of all best practice teaching. It's the basis of the implementation of the balanced literacy program and using the workshop model. Really, with just about everything we teach, we should be following the gradual release of responsibility model. It is such an essential component to quality teaching. In this component of best practice teaching, I focus in on using it within the balanced literacy framework. Some of the best ways to implement the gradual release of responsibility is to start by working it in with when teaching mini lessons, using that teacher modeling of the skills, strategies, and lesson expectations through think-alouds, where you're explaining out loud to students the process and steps you are going through in reference to whatever your focus is on. This is where most of that teacher talk happens, that monological part of your classroom. The modeling and think-along component is the first part of the gradual release of responsibility. I make sure with my 6th graders to explain that I'll be sharing how I go through this in my head, that I'm thinking of blah, 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 or pay attention to how I'm attacking this unknown word, or how I'm making inferences within the novel. I want them to know that it is a think aloud, and I'm walking them through the process of what I'm thinking about in my head so that they can emulate that in their own work. Then the class or group practices the skills together in shared practice. The shared practice is when I might pause during my think aloud or modeling and ask for student input. How should I go about figuring out this word? Or I'm not sure how I could use that piece of information. I know it's important, but how can I include it in my final conclusions? Shared practice is that teacher talk where you're enlisting that student support. During guided practice, then it's the student's turn. Students try the concept, idea, strategy, or skill on their own or in small groups with the support from the teacher as he or she checks in on each group or confers one-on-one with each student. Independent practice is just as it sounds, and students use the skills, concepts, ideas on their own. It's a great quick assessment for teachers to find out if students are understanding and applying the concept correctly. At the end, as closure, wrap it up with the sharing time, which is a time for students to reflect upon what they have learned or understood and where they're going to be going next with the progression of the lesson. This can be done quickly with a think, pair, share. It could be in the form of a written reflection, or it could just be in a group sharing out their ideas. The workshop model. Keep in mind that the workshop model is one that doesn't only have to deal with literacy. Teachers can conduct workshops in other content areas as well. I think about science, our 6th grade science teacher. She conducts a science workshop just about every time she does an experiment. She shows students how she thinks of a hypothesis, the steps she goes through in conducting the experiment, and then explains the final results and her conclusion, reflecting on how or why the hypothesis was correct or not. So don't limit yourself to using workshops solely in reading and writing instances. For our purposes in this course, however, the focus is on literacy and in implementing all the components of a balanced literacy program. And these can be implemented best in a workshop model. The big ideas of the workshop is to work in all the layers of the gradual release of responsibility and our balanced literacy components, along with being able to provide choice for students within the workshop. One of the explanations in this text uses the analogy of the teacher as the master and students as apprentices. The master coaches the apprentice, showing him or her how to complete a craft, watches over them as they complete it, and eventually, when the master feels the apprentice has mastered the skill, allows the apprentice to take over or to move on to create his or her own product. That is how the workshop model works, using the gradual release of responsibility in a timely manner, having students do instead of sit and get, less teacher talk and more students doing it. The element of choice is the key, as many of you had mentioned in last week's discussion forum. In my experience, I have used the workshop model with my genre studies. I conduct a read aloud with a genre of choice. In the beginning of the year, it is action, adventure, and suspense. The last few years, I've used the book Holes, completing think alouds about foreshadowing, using inferring skills, discovering characters, and using context clues. I start by explaining what the purposes and basic elements of the genre are. Some of the bigger ones for this genre is appealing to the reader's conscience and experience victory through character actions as well as inducing excitement. I explain that action-adventure typically unfolds in chronological order. Holes doesn't, so that provides me an opportunity to explain the purpose of white space and flashbacks, which they will encounter in our whole class novel, which ends up being our guided practice. Action-adventure also typically uses violence as a way for things to change in this particular genre. And you have the good guys and the bad guys with lots of suspense. Through my read aloud and mini lessons, students are able to get a feel for the genre. When we start our class novel, our little mini lessons show them how to dive deeper into the text, writing long off of post-it notes and 2-column event and response charts, exploring mood, tone, and conflicts. This all happens through mini lessons and guided practice, then the independent practice on their own. Towards the middle of this unit, I have students choose their own action-adventure novel to use for their genre study. Through the read aloud class novel, the students have practiced the skills and strategies I want them to use in their independent genre study. I've been able to work with students who need extra support as well. Through their genre studies, they can choose any book that they'd like as long as it meets the requirements of the elements of action-adventure and is at their level. As they read, they confer with me, they confer in small groups, sometimes with partners, sharing the elements or words that required utilizing context clues or elements of the action-adventure genre study, and the ideas in their novels. When I'm creating a workshop or unit, I always work backwards, similar to what I explained when unpacking the Common Core state standards. This is a way of focusing in on the essential objectives as the heart of the unit and figuring out what are the other things that need to happen to get us to that point. Strategic thinkers. Strategic thinkers are what we ultimately want our students to become, working through their thinking to come to an understanding. This has come to light by the introduction of certain strategies of thinking, and the text Strategies at Work by Stephanie Harvey and Ad Gudva provide some short summaries of the reading strategies referred to when students are reading. Making connections, text-to-text connections, text-to-world connections, text-to-self connections, and using those meaningful connections to better understand the things they come across in their learning. Using questioning strategies to set purposes, identify confusing parts, moving students forward in their quest for information. The visualization strategy, making movies in their head to help them to better understand and support learning that is happening. Another strategy is using inferring skills, reading between the lines, using what the author doesn't explicitly state to understand the text on a deeper level. Sometimes that inferring might be a simple prediction, but it can go much deeper. Determining importance is another strategy where you're able to sift through the ideas of a text and pick out the main ideas and figuring out which knowledge is important to truly understanding the concept at hand. Synthesizing is another one, being able to provide a summary make generalizations about the topic, or create new meaning about an idea through information gained from multiple sources as well as the main text. The idea of metacognition, which is also referred to as monitoring comprehension or using fix-up strategies, is one we need to make sure that we're instilling within our students. This one is often overlooked. This might be a point where they need to try a different strategy to help them make sense of reading when comprehension breaks down. We all know we have those great word callers who aren't making meaning as they read. This is what we refer to as metacognition. We need to make sure that students are aware of this, which is where all of their other reading strategies fall into place, as well as implementing activities for students to participate in before, during, and after reading. Before you start a new concept, it's always important to have students activate their background knowledge and share it, as well as set a purpose for their reading. Setting a purpose will help to focus students. Activating background knowledge not only will help to address misconceptions, but will also ensure that your students are coming to the learning with similar information and no one has more advantage than another learner. Some other type of before reading activities could be anticipation guides, songs or images to front load the concept and get their minds ready to think about it, or student brainstorming. During reading activities can involve a myriad of different activities. Some of my favorites are stopping and jotting on Post-its, coding the text as they read, which is a type of annotating, writing in the margins, or using 2-column notes where they respond to parts of the text. After reading activities, ask students to reflect or demonstrate their ultimate learning. These can be projects, final conclusions, drama, or written pieces. You can still utilize those chapter questions, but make them more meaningful to the learning at hand, with activities throughout the exploration of information. No more read pages so-and-so and answer the questions at the end. To make strategic thinkers, we need to have purposeful activities that have students thinking throughout their learning, at the beginning, the middle, and the end of their reading. Collaboration. Collaborative activities have students learning from each other. It is okay for your classroom to be loud and busy as long as learning is occurring. It's all about students learning with and from one another. Sometimes students can better understand a concept or process from another student without the teacher talk. In my experience, I have implemented a lot of think, pair, shares throughout my lessons so students can hear from each other and re-explain what it is we need to do, or their way of understanding the topic or using the strategy or skill. I utilize clock, quadrant, or compass rose type partners within my classroom, where in the beginning of the year, students find partners and keep those partners throughout the year. That way they have some choice in who it is that they're working with. That way time isn't wasted finding people to work with. It's pretty much set. Sometimes students work in small groups with their collaboration. I may decide to create the groups myself, depending on the purpose, or let the kids choose. I might have heterogeneous or homogeneous groups as well. Some collaborative type of work that I do in my classroom besides think, pair, share in small groups is through jigsaw activities, where students become the mini expert on a chapter or topic and then teach it to the whole class or another small group. I provide prompting questions they must answer and ask to provide so they can provide that essential information, and also some other questions or prompts that have them integrating some of that nice to know or interesting ideas beyond the prompts. I also conduct book clubs or literature circles, which are collaborative in nature as well. We have small group discussion, in which the stage is set for in the beginning of the year with expectations of how to have proper discussion etiquette. Sometimes these small group discussions surround a prompt, and sometimes it's just a generalized prompt. And students know that all voices within that small group need to be heard, and everyone needs to meaningfully contribute to the discussion. Many classrooms now utilize responsive classroom expectations, which create a safe, collaborative climate for these types of activities. Integration is another one of the 7 structures. When things flow together, it makes more sense to students, which is the idea with integration. In elementary classrooms, this flow can work much more smoothly. In middle and high school classrooms, it seems to happen amongst many teachers and can be a little more difficult to pull off, but not impossible. I like it because it makes it easier on the students. They don't have to switch their brains to a different subject every single time they transition in middle and high school. They can make more connections to their learning through this integration. It also is nice since it makes you focus more on the need to know and get rid of some of that extra fluff. Our 6th grade unit does a nice job with this in the study of ancient Greece. I teach about the gods and goddesses and myths. The social studies teacher teaches the ancient Greek life and history. Our English teacher has them creating ancient Greek newspapers. And our science teacher brings in some of the theories of those times. Math does tie it in a little bit by focusing in on the Pythagorean theory, and they do look at Greek architecture. Then, when students are done reading the myths in reading class, they create their own version of a fractured Greek myth, kind of different versions of Cinderella or the Three Little Pigs. Think about that in relationship to the Greek myths. And then they perform that to their class. The winners move on to what we have now named the Greek Drama Festival, and they perform it for the whole 6th grade. This is always the one thing that students remember the most about 6th grade, because every single class is focusing in on this Greek Drama Festival and this Greek learning. Representing to learn. The concepts that really stick with students are the ones that they have to do. When we think about the cone of learning, students remember 90% of what they say and do. It is important to make sure to activate learning through the multiple intelligences, which hopefully you've learned about at some point in time, where you have your auditory learners, you have your visual learners, you have your kinesthetic, your musical, your spatial, all those different kinds of intelligences. Have students demonstrate their learning in several different ways to make it stick. And as we read about in chapter 3 of our text, motivating learners, choice is huge in that motivation. So you could utilize choice boards to show understanding, and this works well in representing student learning. It can be students participating in different activities beyond that paper and pencil. It could be them showing it through drama, role-playing, drawing, constructing, creating a song or a rap to help them to remember things. But using authentic learning to show what it is that they have eventually learned with that concept or skill or strategy. Formative and reflective assessment. This is one area that drives instruction, the formative or reflective assessment your students participate in. I use exit slips a ton in my classroom, asking how their thinking changed about a concept from the beginning of the unit, or it might be a specific prompt about a chapter. I also have a poster on my classroom door asking students what stuck with you, and before they leave, they write their big takeaways on a post-it and stick it to the back of the door as they leave. These really help me to find out what I may have to reteach or what went well. Sometimes it's anonymous, others times I ask for initials or names, depending on what I ultimately want. The formative assessment could be a simple thumbs up or thumbs down for opinions, or a yes or no type of question. I also like to implement the fist to 5, where the students put their hands on in front of their chest, more so that others can't see their answers, and hold up a fist if they don't understand at all, and would hold up to 5 fingers if they completely understand. I like to do this with directions or a mini lesson before I let them head out to practice. I also use my reading bins to collect samples for student portfolios. There's a resource out there called the Literacy Teacher's Playbook by Jennifer Saravallo, which has a ton of great record-keeping ideas for keeping track of student growth and assessment. So these are the basics of the general 7 structures of best practice instruction. Think about how they align with the things that we're reading about in our book and the best practice literacy instruction. Remember that reading is the key to learning. It is the central focus that engages all students. Happy reading.